Let's talk about why your worship team struggles with dynamics and why your band just sounds like this wall of sound assaulting the ears of your congregation every single Sunday. I don't know if it's actually that bad, but let's talk about 5 things that I've noticed that worship teams do on a regular basis that destroys the dynamic nature of your band playing together. I don't know how to describe that. I should come up with a better way to describe that. But these things are so easy to fix, and you just have to know about them and then stop doing them, and then it's like, oh, eureka, I finally found the secret to playing more dynamically. The first thing that I see worship bands do relates to their singers, and this is how I grew up. I kind of grew up in a worship team that did this, where it's like you've got a bunch of singers on stage, and they all just sing the entire time through the entire song. And some of them might sing harmony, some of them might sing melody, maybe all of them are singing melody the whole way through the song. But if you have multiple vocalists on your worship team, they don't all need to be singing the entire time throughout the entire song, even if they're singing different parts. Instead, what you should do is you should have them strategically come in at different points in the song to add flavor and color to different parts of the song, to highlight different things, to increase the dynamics overall. Because just imagine, if you have one person singing, you have one person singing. If you have 4 people joining them in singing, now your threshold for quietness in that part of the song has drastically increased, or reduced, I guess. Because if you have one person singing, the volume can be down here, though. That one person can sing as quiet as they want. But if you have 4 people joining them, then they can only sing this quietly. And so now you've destroyed this entire floor of dynamics in your song. And so by simply removing those 4 people singing along with the main vocalist, now you're back down here, which means you can add them back in, and you can even do it progressively over time, and they don't just have to sing quietly, but they can sing louder as well. And so your dynamic floor for the vocals in your song could go from here all the way up to here, and in between there, you've got one person singing, you got somebody who joins them in harmony, and then you've got 2 more people joining them singing the melody of the song, and so on and so forth, and then they all get louder at the same time. Do you see how much more dynamically you have to work with when you don't just all sing at the same time? So if you want to improve the dynamics of your worship team, one of the things you can do is to stop having all of your singers sing at the same time, even if they're singing different parts. Now, the second mistake I see worship teams make, if you are an instrumentalist and you're like, whew, he's not talking about me there. Well, guess what? I'm talking about you now, because instrumentalists do the same thing as vocalists do. All of these vocalists think that they have to sing at the same time. A lot of times, all the instrumentalists think that they have to play at the same time as well. And so it's like every song starts with 1, 2, 3, boo, down, that was like that sounded like Smells Like Teen Spirit or something. I don't know why that came out. But you don't, just because you're up front holding an instrument doesn't mean that you have to be playing all the time, and it doesn't even mean that you should be playing all the time. Playing in a worship team is not just about playing, it is also about knowing when not to play. And you're going to get so much more mileage out of knowing when not to play as you will of just playing all the time. And so if you're a bass player or a drummer, don't come in until verse 2 or something, all right? The drummers, not for every song, but for some songs, you don't need to be in until verse 2. You don't need to kick in. And then you're thinking, it's going to be boring, I'm just going to be sitting there. But what happens is, if you're a drummer or a bass player and you don't come in until verse 2, then your entrance into the song actually makes a bigger impact because instead of it just being in there the whole time from the very beginning of the song, you actually highlight, okay, things are a little bit different in this second verse now because something else happened, something new happened. And not that we're trying to draw attention to ourselves through this, I'm just saying dynamically in the song, adding the bass and drums in the second verse is completely different than playing the whole way throughout the song. And so think about if that makes sense in one of the songs that you're playing. Also, you could just start out with the keyboard playing, have a piano playing at the beginning, and then the acoustic guitar player just strums like one chord in the chorus of a song. I always think of this in Lord, I Need You. We'll pretend like this is the keyboardist playing here at the beginning. Lord, I come, I confess, bowing here, I find my rest. And then in the chorus, I usually hit like this high chord up here, and it's like, Lord, I need you, oh, I need every hour I need you. See how I would abstain from playing at the beginning so that when I hit that high chord, it's like something's different in that first chorus. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. And that's true for all of the instruments. If you have only ever played all the time in the song, stop doing that. Listen to the original recording. We're going to talk about this at the very end of the video. But listen to the original recording and see how they play, and you will see that they don't play the entire time through the entire song. Now, the third mistake I see worship teams make is that they aren't thinking of the sonic space in the song, even when they're all supposed to be playing together. And here's what I mean by the sonic space. I kind of visualize it in my mind as a line, like a horizontal line, all right? And this is like, I guess technically it would be 0 hertz frequency. This is a frequency spectrum we're looking at. And I'm not 100% sure what instruments fall in what spectrum of frequency. So I'm kind of making the specifics up here, but the concept applies. So you have 0 hertz down here, and then you have like up to 20,000 hertz or whatever it is up here. And that is the sonic spectrum of what the human ear can hear, or something along those lines. And your instrument that you're playing fits in somewhere in that sonic spectrum. And so the reason that your band might sound like a wall of sound, and it might sound, you might call that like sounding muddy, is because all of the instruments of your band might be trying to cram into a narrow space on that spectrum. And so what that would look like, I'll put a visualization up here. You have bass, and you have guitar, and you have keyboard, and you have electric guitar 1 and electric guitar 2, and let's just use all those, and I guess you could throw your vocals in there too. And if they're all playing in the same sort of octave, the same sort of range, they don't have any effects on them, then you're trying to squeeze them all into this very narrow sonic spectrum there. And so you can see on this line, you've got all of this room to work with, but because you're all playing in the same octave, nobody's thinking about, okay, the bass is going to play the low note, the keyboard player is going to be playing something high in their right hand. You just squeeze it all in there. And that's why it sounds muddy, because everybody's stomping on top of each other. As opposed to doing something like this. You've got the bass and the kick drum down here in the low frequencies. Above that, maybe you have acoustic guitar or something. Above that, you have like this jingly electric line happening. And then you've got the vocals somewhere in there as well. And you see how you're now working with a wider spectrum of the sonic space that you have to work with? So think about that. As your band is playing together, think, do I have 2 acoustic guitar players? You could even break this down into individual sections. If you have 2 acoustic guitar players on your team and they're both just playing like the same exact chords, like the song is in the key of A and they say, okay, well, let's put our capo on the 2nd fret and both play G shapes and we'll play the same exact thing, then you are muddying up that space. Instead of having somebody play without a capo and then somebody playing with a capo, and then you have 2 people playing two different chord shapes, but the same chord, and that widens out the sonic spectrum. So you can get as granular as you want here. But the main concept is we want to fill up, depending on the part of the song. We don't want to do this through the whole song because we're not all playing at the same time. But think of that sonic spectrum and think, okay, if I want the song to be louder and sound fuller here, then I need to fill up more of the sonic spectrum. So that was the third mistake, but you can also think of this, and it's not really a mistake, it is a way of thinking about this. We talked about sort of a horizontal spectrum, but I like to, whenever I think about it on my own instrument, I like to think of it as verticality in my music. And I suppose this is the same concept, but this is just a different way of thinking about it. So when I'm playing guitar, and I talk about this in my advanced guitar course, I believe, where I'm talking about the verticality of the song, and by that I'm really speaking about the sonic spectrum of the song, but I think of it in verticality because I'm thinking of like, okay, I'm down here, this is like low, right? And then we could also play a G up here. And I'm playing the same chord, but one of them is low. If we switch our spectrum to go vertical, one of them's down here, like this is your standard G chord, that's pretty much as low as we can get. But then there's also a bunch of stuff in between there, because we've got a G chord like this, and it thins it out a little bit, and maybe that moves it a little bit higher on the sonic spectrum. We've also got a G chord up here, and so now we're even further up. We could do a G chord up here, which kind of moves it up more, and probably the highest would be something like this. So I'm playing B, G, D. I'm playing it up there, or we could play it down here. So I like to think of it in verticality too. Oh, and you can also hit like harmonics. I guess that would be even higher. So here, think of it in terms of verticality. I'll go from like low verticality to high verticality and back down again. So here's low. Thin it out a little bit. Thin it out. Even more. Even more. Back down. Lower. Lower. Lowest. So if you're a guitarist, think about verticality from that perspective. If you are a keyboard player, then you would think about it in terms of where your hands are positioned on the keyboard. If you're a bass player, you would think about it just what like the lowest note you're playing and the highest note you're playing. If you are a vocalist, you might be thinking about it in terms of like head voice and chest voice. If you are a drummer, you might be thinking about it in terms of like cymbal swells. That in my mind would be a very vertical part of the song versus like tom work and boom, 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 as opposed to shh, right? So think about it vertically. And then the fifth mistake I see worship teams make is that they simply don't talk about all of this beforehand. They just show up and they're like, did you learn your part? And they're like, yeah, I know how to play the song. And by that, they mean I know how to play the chords to the song or I know the lead line. But nobody says, okay, well, I want you to come in here and you to come in here and you to come in here, and then we'll all be in together, and then we'll cut out at this part, and then we'll come back in. If you just talk through those sorts of things, it'll solve like 90% of your problems. First of all, people have to understand that they shouldn't be playing the whole time, but then you have to actually give them a vision for what that looks like. And so talk about it beforehand. I'm going to link some videos down below where I go into more depth about how to talk about it beforehand. There's one where I break down like an outline of a song and how I would communicate it to my team, so I'll link that down below. But a great place to start is just to take a song that your team is familiar with, listen to the original recording of it. Like I would literally take time out of my worship rehearsal to do this. Sit down with my team, say, hey, we're going to listen to this song that we all know. We're going to listen to the original recording, and I want you to listen for when your specific instrument comes in and when it cuts out and what sort of parts it's playing in there. Is it playing like a low part or is it playing like a high part? And if your team could just grasp that concept and hear it in action in a song that they actually know, then I think it would go a long way in helping them apply that concept to their own playing. So try that at your next rehearsal. And if you don't have a plan for your worship rehearsal and you're like, I don't even know when I would have time to do that at my rehearsal, then check out down below the free PDF I put together called the Worship Rehearsal Blueprint. In that, I will give you the 5 steps to a perfect worship rehearsal so that you can lead your team well spiritually so that they grow closer to God, relationally so that they grow closer to each other, but also musically so you actually have time to work on stuff like this. So check that out down in the description below. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.